Madison Lawson wanted excitement. Eric Lawson just wanted to hold his marriage together. When her craving for danger led her into the arms of a violent stranger, it wasn't just love that died. It was Eric. What began as a secret affair turned into a calculated plan, and in the end, Madison's fantasy became Eric's fatal nightmare. Madison and Eric Lawson were the kind of couple that made people believe in happily ever after. They met in high school, dated through college, and married. In a simple ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Their life together was one of routine and comfort. Eric, with his calm demeanor and methodical approach to life, worked in IT for a local company. He was dependable, kind, and the type of man who paid the bills on time, remembered anniversaries, and kissed his wife goodnight without fail. Madison, on the other hand, was a spark, creative, emotional, and endlessly searching for passion in a life that had grown increasingly predictable. She taught yoga part-time at a nearby studio and often filled her afternoons with coffee dates, fitness classes, and scrolling through lifestyle blogs that promised a more exciting way of living. They lived in a modest yet beautiful home in a quiet Tennessee suburb where the neighbors waved from their driveways and lawns were always neatly trimmed. Friends admired their relationship. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The Instagram posts of weekend getaways, the dinner parties with candlelit tables, the shared smiles captured in sunny vacation photos. But pictures only tell part of the story. Behind the filtered snapshots and smiling faces, a silent gap was growing between them. Eric loved structure. He found peace in routine and often stuck to the same schedule without deviation. While Madison once found comfort in this stability, it slowly became a source of resentment. She began feeling suffocated by the sameness of their days. She wanted excitement, unpredictability, a thrill that Eric simply didn't offer. It wasn't that she didn't love him, at least not in the beginning. But love, she realized, wasn't enough to silence the restlessness creeping into her mind. Over time, small things began to change. Madison started staying out later with friends, taking solo trips to the city under the pretense of yoga workshops. She became less engaged at home, more distracted, more distant. Eric noticed, but he didn't confront her. He believed it was just a phase, a temporary shift. In his eyes, Madison would come back to him, back to the life they had built, when she was ready. But he underestimated how deep her dissatisfaction ran. The truth was, Madison was already drifting away, mentally, emotionally, and soon, physically. It started with curiosity. Late-night browsing on her phone led her to online chat rooms and private message boards. She used a fake name, a fake picture, just to see what was out there. At first, it was harmless, a form of escape. But then she met someone who would change everything. A man whose raw energy and unapologetic confidence reignited a spark in her she thought had died. Someone who wasn't interested in stability, who didn't care about dinner parties or monthly budgets. Someone who made her feel alive. As her contact with this man deepened, Madison found herself living a double life. By day, she smiled politely at neighbors and helped Eric fold laundry. By night, she was someone else entirely, thrilled by risk, intoxicated by secrecy. The thrill became addictive, and soon, the boundaries between fantasy and reality began to blur. Eric, ever trusting, had no idea what was happening. He believed in his marriage. He believed in Madison. He didn't know that the woman he shared a home with was chasing something dark, something dangerous, something that would ultimately lead him to his death. In his eyes, their biggest problem was distance. In hers, it was that he wasn't someone else entirely. The storm was forming silently, and Eric Lawson was standing directly in its path. The turning point in Madison Lawson's life came on a humid afternoon in early May. Alone in the house while Eric worked a double shift, she scrolled through her phone, aimlessly bouncing between social media and anonymous chat apps. One click led to another until she landed on a profile that caught her attention. The man called himself Jax. His photos were raw: motorcycles, smoke-filled bars, and street tattoos. His words were blunt and charged with attitude. He wasn't the kind of man she was supposed to talk to, and that's exactly why she couldn't look away. Their first exchange was casual, flirtatious, but harmless. Jax didn't ask about her marriage. He didn't care who she was during the day. He was only interested in who she became when no one else was watching. Madison, craving the rush of attention and forbidden connection, fed into it. The conversations quickly escalated. Within days, they were exchanging messages late into the night. He told her things Eric never would. Things that felt dangerous, thrilling, and addictive. She used a separate phone she kept hidden in the laundry room, always turned off when Eric was home. In her messages, she wasn't Madison Lawson, the suburban wife. She became Mara, a bold, wild version of herself who wasn't bound by marriage or routine. And Jax loved that version of her. He encouraged it. He asked for more pictures, more stories, more promises of what they would do once they met in person. Their first meeting happened in a parking lot just outside of town. Madison told Eric she was attending a yoga retreat. Instead, she spent the night in a dingy motel room with Jax, whose real name she never bothered to ask. It didn't matter. The experience was raw and impulsive, unlike anything she'd ever known. He was reckless, unpredictable, and fully detached from consequence. Madison left the next morning shaken but exhilarated. She told herself it was a one-time mistake, but deep down, she already knew she would see him again. Soon, their affair became a regular part of her life. Every few weeks, she would invent reasons to leave home: weekend workshops, family emergencies, overnight retreats. Eric, trusting and unassuming, never questioned her. Madison's lies grew bolder. The more time she spent with Jax, the more dissatisfied she became with her husband. She started comparing everything. Eric's steady voice now sounded dull. His kindness felt like weakness. His predictability became unbearable. Jax fed that resentment. In his eyes, Eric was just an obstacle. He made comments laced with jealousy, pushing Madison to question why she was still married at all. He called her weak for staying. She began to feel trapped, not just by her marriage, but by the life she had once chosen so willingly. Jax offered her an alternative, a world without limits, without expectations. He promised freedom, danger, and a kind of love that burned rather than warmed. By July, Jax's tone shifted. The passion turned darker. He wasn't content being the secret anymore. He wanted more than stolen nights and whispered phone calls. He asked about Eric, where he worked, when he was home, what his routines were. Madison laughed it off at first, treating it as part of the fantasy. But Jax was serious. He started outlining scenarios, hypotheticals that grew more disturbing each time. At first, it sounded like a joke. Then it started sounding like a plan. Still, Madison kept returning to him. She told herself she wasn't responsible for his words, that this was still just an affair, a personal escape. But in her gut, she knew that the boundary between fantasy and reality had already begun to erode. And as Jax's ideas turned into suggestions and suggestions into strategies, she stood at a crossroads, one that would soon lead her far beyond anything she could ever undo. By the time August rolled around, the affair between Madison and Jax had moved far beyond reckless excitement. It was no longer just secret meetings or midnight messages. It had become a dark partnership fueled by lust, manipulation, and a shared disregard for consequence. Madison was now more emotionally entangled than she realized. What began as a fantasy had hardened into something real, something dangerous. And Jax, sensing her vulnerability, took full control. That he was no longer simply interested in being her secret. He wanted everything: her money, her house, her life. Madison had confessed just enough to give him leverage. She'd told him about Eric's job, their quiet neighborhood, and the $500,000 life insurance policy she discovered in their filing cabinet. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, just another intimate detail she shared while wrapped in his arms. But for Jax, it was a door swinging open. He began talking about it constantly, weaving it into their conversations like it was the most natural solution in the world. He painted a picture of their future together, far away from Tennessee, free from the mundane life Madison had come to despise. With that kind of money, they could start fresh. A cabin in the mountains, a bar on the coast. No more secrets, no more hiding. Just them. Madison resisted at first. The idea horrified her. Killing her husband was something she couldn't even process. But Jax never said the word kill. He framed it differently. An accident. A breaking gone wrong. Something quick, clean, and untraceable. He assured her it would be painless for Eric and liberating for them. And if they timed it right, no one would ever suspect her. She tried to pull away. She ignored his messages, avoided his calls. But each time, he reeled her back in. He knew her too well by now. He understood how to prey on her insecurities, how to whisper to the part of her that longed to feel alive. Slowly, Madison's fear dulled, and in its place grew something colder. Acceptance, even anticipation. The plan came together in pieces. Jax would enter the house while Eric was away. He would find a place to hide. Madison would make sure the doors were unlocked and leave town for the night, claiming a pre-scheduled retreat. When Eric returned home, the house would be dark, empty, or so he'd think. Jax would strike fast, leave no evidence, and disappear into the night. Madison would return the next morning, discover the scene, and call the police in tears. She'd play the grieving widow, and once the dust settled, the insurance money would come through. In early September, they selected a date. Madison was quiet that week, her mood strange even for someone leading a double life. She moved through her routines like a ghost, barely looking Eric in the eye. He, ever patient and optimistic, believed she was just going through a rough patch. He tried to surprise her with flowers. She forced a smile and thanked him. Inside, she was unraveling. The night of the plan, Madison packed a small overnight bag and kissed Eric goodbye. She told him not to wait up, that she might be gone until morning. He smiled and told her to drive safe. She drove away without looking back. By the time Eric pulled into the driveway later that night, the house was dark just as Madison had promised. He unlocked the door, walked inside, and never walked out again. Jax carried out the attack swiftly and without hesitation. He wore gloves, used a weapon he brought himself, and left no fingerprints behind. There was no sign of forced entry, no items missing. Just Eric's lifeless body on the cold tile floor. By morning, Madison was back in town, dressed in her yoga clothes, her eyes puffy with staged tears. She made the 911 call with a trembling voice, describing the horror she'd come home to. But behind the performance, her mind was already spinning, wondering if they'd really pulled it off. News of Eric Lawson's death spread quickly through the neighborhood. A respected, quiet man murdered in his own home. People were shocked, frightened, and confused. Police arrived within minutes of Madison's frantic 911 call. The scene was grim but strangely clean. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was missing. No broken windows, no ransacked drawers, no footprints. Just Eric, lying motionless near the front hallway with blunt force trauma to the head. From the start, detectives felt something was off. It looked staged, too neat, too careful. Most home invasions are chaotic, especially those ending in murder. Yet this scene felt sterile, deliberate. Madison, when questioned, was distraught but oddly composed. She claimed she had just returned from a yoga retreat in the next town over. She said she found the door ajar and knew instantly something was wrong. She gave a timeline, showed receipts from a local spa, and even produced photos on her phone. On the surface, her alibi seemed solid. Still, the detectives weren't satisfied. They interviewed neighbors, co-workers, and friends. Eric had no known enemies, no shady dealings, no history of conflict. He wasn't wealthy, but the life insurance policy was noted quickly. Madison was listed as the sole beneficiary. That raised eyebrows. So did her behavior in the days that followed. While she shed tears during interviews and spoke lovingly about her late husband at the memorial, investigators noticed how quickly she shifted focus to money. She began asking questions about the policy, about timelines, about payouts. It was subtle, but troubling. They dug deeper into her digital life. Madison had erased much of her phone's data before handing it over, but fragments remained. Texts to unknown numbers, encrypted messaging apps, and sudden deletions in the days leading up to the murder all raised suspicion. A search warrant was issued for her phone records and cloud backups. In the meantime, the forensic team continued analyzing the crime scene. They confirmed that no fingerprints other than Madison's and Eric's were present, but shoe prints left faint impressions near the hallway, prints that didn't match anything found in the home. Then came the security footage. A neighbor's doorbell camera had caught a blurry image of a vehicle parked down the street the night of the murder. The car didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood and wasn't parked there long. Investigators pulled traffic camera data and tracked the same car entering the area just before 9 p.m. and leaving again around 10. The vehicle was registered to a man named Jason Holt, a mechanic with a criminal record spanning burglary, assault, and drug charges. Jason, they discovered, matched the man Madison had been secretly communicating with under the alias Jax. Although much of the messaging was gone, cloud recovery showed screenshots, call logs, and several unsent drafts that hinted at their relationship. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Still, detectives needed something more concrete, something undeniable. Madison hadn't spoken to Jason since the murder, but that silence worked against her. It proved she had a reason to disconnect, a reason to hide. When investigators brought her in for a second round of questioning, they mentioned Jason's name. Her reaction was immediate, tense, defensive, and inconsistent. She claimed she didn't know anyone by that name, then quickly backtracked and said they'd only met once. At this point, the case began tightening around her. Surveillance footage, phone data, and her shifting story painted a clear picture of deception. But the real break came from within her own circle. Madison's younger sister, Anna, contacted the police after an unsettling conversation. Madison had slipped, mentioning a specific detail about the murder scene, the exact angle of Eric's body. That information had never been released publicly. It was the mistake investigators had been waiting for. With that slip and the mounting digital evidence, a warrant was issued for Madison's arrest. They knew Jason wouldn't be far behind. The story wasn't over, but the truth was beginning to emerge, and it was darker than anyone had imagined. Madison Lawson was arrested without incident 1 week after her sister's statement. Her face was pale, lips tight, and she spoke barely a word as officers placed her in the back of the squad car. The image shocked the town. The woman who had once seemed like a glowing example of suburban grace was now the prime suspect in her own husband's murder. The evidence, once scattered and circumstantial, had solidified. Police had Madison's deleted messages, suspicious search history, and her connection to Jason Holt, the man caught on security footage near the Lawson residence the night Eric was killed. Jason, meanwhile, had disappeared. Authorities launched a statewide manhunt, warning the public that he was dangerous. Weeks passed without a trace of him until a tip led investigators to a trailer in rural Kentucky. Inside, Jason was found hiding under a false name, armed but taken without resistance. In the trailer, detectives uncovered more than weapons. They found notes written in Madison's handwriting, maps, and even a printed list of Eric's weekly schedule. It was undeniable. The murder had been planned meticulously. Faced with overwhelming evidence, both were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. The community was stunned. Eric Lawson, by all accounts a gentle and hardworking man, had been killed not by a stranger, but by the woman he had trusted most. And for what? A fantasy, a thrill, a payout. The trial drew national attention. Madison sat silently throughout the proceedings, her once stylish demeanor replaced by a hollow stare. Prosecutors painted her as cold and calculating, a woman who used seduction and deceit to manipulate a known criminal into killing her husband. The messages she had sent to Jason were read aloud in court, vivid, flirtatious, and increasingly dark. She had encouraged him. She had fed the idea. She had chosen to pursue the fantasy, even when she had every chance to stop it. That Jason's defense team attempted to portray him as the mastermind, claiming Madison was a vulnerable woman under his influence. But the prosecution was ready. They showed how Madison had lied to police, wiped her phone, and even began preparing to collect the life insurance payout just days after the murder. This wasn't weakness. It was premeditation. Witnesses testified about Madison's growing dissatisfaction in the months leading up to Eric's death. Friends mentioned how she often spoke about wanting more out of life, how she had grown distant, impulsive, and obsessed with the idea of change. Her sister, now a key witness, recounted the unsettling conversation that revealed Madison knew things she shouldn't have. That moment had sealed her fate. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Madison Lawson was found guilty on all counts. Jason Holt received the same verdict. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Madison, due to her role in orchestrating the plan and attempting to benefit financially, was sentenced to 45 years, eligible for parole after 30. She showed no visible emotion when the sentence was read. After the trial, Eric's parents issued a brief statement. They spoke not of vengeance, but of heartbreak. Their son had trusted and loved a woman who quietly plotted his end. They had lost more than a family member. They had lost their faith in people. Eric was buried in the same town he grew up in, remembered by co-workers and neighbors as kind, gentle, and humble. The Madison story became a chilling example of how fantasy, when left unchecked, can turn deadly. It began with a craving for excitement, a secret message, a thrill. It ended with a body on the floor, a life sentence, and a truth too devastating for anyone to fully understand. The woman who once wanted more out of life had taken everything from someone who only wanted to love her.